He burned for hours, on his own land, and no one came looking. In July of 2018, in the quiet rural sprawl of Cherokee County, Georgia, 58-year-old Gary Ferris, father of 4, respected real estate attorney, husband of nearly 4 decades, vanished without a trace. When his body was finally found days later, it wasn't in a hospital or along a back road. It was in the family's burn pile, reduced to bone. But what truly chills the air around this case isn't just where Gary was found. It's who knew he was there, before anyone was supposed to know. This is not your typical domestic murder. It's a case tangled in betrayal, buried beneath ashes, and split open by accusation. One that shattered a family and left a mother sentenced to life after pointing her finger at her own son. In today's episode of Cold Radio, we're not just telling you the story of the Ferris family. We're unraveling it. We're diving deep into the top 5 most haunting and unexplained elements of this case. 5 cracks in the story that still echo with unanswered questions. A confession whispered too early, to someone who should have never heard it. A 130-pound woman, accused of moving a 300-pound corpse without a single drop of blood left behind. A murder weapon that vanished from a locked property like smoke. A wedding betrayal so brazen it reshaped how millions saw the suspect. And, finally, a courtroom accusation so brutal it redefined the meaning of family turned against itself. These aren't just quirks in an investigation. These are core contradictions, psychological fractures, echoes of a truth that still feels buried somewhere beneath the surface. What makes this case stand apart, what makes it so personal, so jarring, isn't just the crime. It's the collapse of trust, of love, a story where the lines between victim and villain blur, and even the jury couldn't fully explain how the body got from the house to the fire. And that's where we begin. At Cold Radio, we don't settle for the headlines. We peel back the story, examining the timeline, the forensics, the missing pieces. We ask, what are we not seeing? What do the clues really suggest? And how does a family go from Sunday dinners to murder and a life sentence? And today, we start with the first, and perhaps most disturbing, detail. A phrase overheard in a phone call. 5 words. Too early, too specific, too damning. He's in the burn pile. Coming up next, we unpack the moment that some say was the closest thing to a confession, and ask the question, how could she have known, unless she already knew? Top 1. The burn pile confession. That came too early. There are moments in a murder case that make your stomach turn, not because of blood or violence, but because of something far more chilling: timing. Not what was said, but when it was said. The first mysterious point in the Ferris family case centers on 5 words, spoken in a quiet phone call between 2 lovers, words that now echo louder than any scream. He's in the burn pile. That sentence was allegedly spoken by Melody Ferris, the wife of the victim, to her longtime secret lover, Rusty Barton. The problem isn't just the call, it's that, according to Rusty, Melody said those words before Gary's body had even been officially discovered. At that point, Gary Ferris had only been reported missing. Family members were searching the property, the burn pile still smoldering. His body, charred and skeletal, hadn't been positively identified. And yet, Melody allegedly told Rusty exactly where he was. Rusty later recalled that moment to investigators. He said, "She said Gary was in the burn pile. I told her, don't say another word. Don't tell me anything I don't need to know. Now stop and consider that." Before the authorities knew where Gary was, before anyone could confirm the horror that had unfolded, Melody already seemed to know the ending. The timeline makes this detail even harder to ignore. On July 3rd, Gary was last seen alive. On July 4th, family members, including Melody, claimed they thought he'd just gone off somewhere. It wasn't until July 5th that his charred remains were discovered in the burn pile on their property. Yet the call between Melody and Rusty, according to his first statement, happened on July 4th. A day before Gary's remains were discovered. This isn't speculation. It's not rumor. It's part of the official case record, and it forms one of the most psychologically jarring threads in this entire investigation. Now, here's where the story gets even murkier. When Rusty first told investigators about that phone call, he clearly stated the timeline. Melody told him Gary was in the burn pile before the discovery. But a year later, after Melody's arrest, Rusty changed his story. He claimed the call happened after the body was found, that he had simply gotten the dates wrong. But had he? Or was he trying to protect someone he still had feelings for? From an investigative standpoint, this moment is massive. It raises multiple red flags. If Melody truly said that before Gary's body was found, how could she have known? Was it a slip of the tongue, a sign of guilt, or just an emotional outburst? And why did Rusty, a year later, suddenly shift the timeline? Out of fear, loyalty, or pressure? This single phrase, "he's in the burn pile," opens up an entire corridor of doubt. It makes us ask the same thing so many viewers asked when they watched this trial unfold. How could anyone say that? Unless they already knew it was true. Could Melody have simply guessed? Was it just a terrible coincidence? Or was this the moment where a murderer's mask briefly slipped? And what about Rusty? His reaction, cutting her off, refusing to hear more, suggests fear. Not just fear of involvement, but fear of truth. Audience members who followed this case online and through broadcasts have pointed to this moment again and again. Some described it as the moment she gave herself away. Others asked, why didn't this count as a confession? One viewer even called it the creepiest thing I've ever heard in a courtroom, because what it hints at is terrifying. If Melody knew where Gary's body was before it was discovered, it suggests one of two things. Either she was involved or she had been told by someone who was. And if she was the only one home during the time Gary vanished, according to phone records, then there's a deeper implication. The kind that doesn't just raise eyebrows, it raises the stakes. This is what makes the Ferris case unlike so many others. It's not just the murder, it's the way it was talked about, the things said in passing, the knowledge people had, too early, too specifically. So we have to ask, was that phone call a confession disguised as conversation, or was it something even more sinister, a manipulative breadcrumb in a larger cover-up? Either way, it's the kind of detail that doesn't just disturb, it lingers. Next, we examine the second strange contradiction. A woman barely over 130 pounds, a man well over 300, and a body that was moved without a single drop of blood left behind. How? We'll explore that mystery next on Cold Radio. It's one of the oldest axioms in criminal investigation. Bodies don't move themselves. And, in the Ferris case, this simple truth creates one of its most baffling contradictions. Top 2. How did a 130-pound woman move a 300-pound corpse 50 yards across uneven ground without a single drop of blood, a single eyewitness, or a single sound? When Gary Ferris was found on July 5, 2018, it wasn't in his bed, or in the woods, or anywhere a missing person might logically end up. He was found deep inside the burn pile on the family farm, reduced to bones, fused together by heat, his body having burned for hours. But what the investigators quickly realized was that his body hadn't just fallen there. It had been placed, moved, transported with purpose, and that's where the questions begin. Gary Ferris was a large man, 6 feet 5 inches, over 300 pounds. Melody Ferris, his wife of nearly 40 years, was roughly 130 pounds at the time. Small in stature, no known history of serious strength training, no evidence of prior injury or dislocation to her frame. She was a 64-year-old woman, not someone you'd expect to haul a full-grown man across 50 yards of pasture. And yet, somehow, someone did. According to investigators, there were only 2 plausible ways Gary's body could have been moved. 1. Manually, dragged or rolled by hand. 2. Mechanically, using farm equipment, either the RTV, a rugged terrain vehicle, or the tractor, both of which were found on the property. Melody did operate both. She admitted she'd used the RTV regularly. She also knew how to drive the tractor. But here's the problem. There were no conclusive signs, no distinct blood trails, no drag marks, linking either machine directly to the burn pile. And although traces of Gary's blood were found on the side of the tractor, none were detected in the bucket, the most likely transport mechanism. So if Melody used the tractor, how did she avoid leaving blood in the one place it should have pooled? And if she didn't use it, if she did it manually, then how did she move such a massive weight through tall grass and uneven terrain without help? Forensic experts noted that the land slopes downward from the house toward the burn pile. Gravity, they said, could have helped. Investigators even entertained the theory that Melody might have rolled his body downhill. But that raises a disturbing image, one that many viewers found hard to shake, because this wasn't a sandbag. It was a man, her husband. And rolling him like discarded debris over rocks and roots requires not just physical strength, but emotional detachment. This makes us wonder, could Melody have had help? Could someone, knowingly or unknowingly, have assisted her in moving Gary's body that night? Or could the entire timeline be wrong? Some in the audience have raised their own theories. One comment read, "You can't move a body a third that size without help." Another noted, "The blood evidence didn't add up, so maybe the movement happened in stages?" Others have suggested a more unsettling angle, that the scene was staged, that perhaps Gary was killed elsewhere and later burned not just to destroy the body, but to destroy the truth. And yet, throughout all of this, the investigation kept circling back to one question. If not Melody, then who? Because phone records placed Scott Ferris, the adult son who lived on the property, miles away at the time Gary was believed to have been moved, and Amanda, the youngest daughter, stood firmly behind her mother, claiming she believed in Melody's innocence. So we're left with this impossible contradiction. A man too heavy to move, a woman too small to carry him. And yet, the body burned. What are we missing? Was there a gap in the investigation, a detail overlooked? Or did someone very familiar with this land and its secrets, find a way to move a body without leaving a single incriminating mark? Because if Melody did move Gary on her own, the act itself implies more than just premeditation. It implies calculation, it implies strength, and, perhaps most hauntingly, it implies control. Next, we turn to something equally troubling, something invisible in court, yet deeply felt by those who watched this story unfold. The gun that killed Gary Ferris was never found. Where is the murder weapon? And how does something so critical simply disappear? If these two mysterious details, or anything else in this case, made you pause and think, let us know. A simple like not only supports the channel, but also helps share this story with more people, others who are also searching for answers. Do you have a theory? Did something seem off to you? Share your thoughts, or any other detail, in the comments below. Every insight is a piece of the puzzle, and who knows, maybe you will be the one who helps bring us one step closer to the truth. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's move on to the next mystery. A murder case can hinge on many things: motive, opportunity, witness accounts. But there's one element that speaks louder than all the rest: the weapon, the very object that turns a human decision into irreversible violence. And in the Ferris case, that object has disappeared. Top 3. The murder weapon that was never found. Gary Ferris was shot, that's a fact. The autopsy revealed a .38 caliber bullet lodged deep in his rib. It was badly damaged, melted by fire, but still intact enough to be analyzed. Later, in the basement of the Ferris home, investigators found another bullet, same caliber, lying on the floor near a faint pool of Gary's blood. 2 bullets, 2 scenes. One conclusion: Gary had been shot at least twice, likely once in the house, and once before his body was placed in the fire. And yet, the gun that fired those bullets has never been recovered. No smoking barrel, no matching revolver, no clear line from trigger to victim. Now, this wasn't a property without firearms. The Ferris family owned several. Shotguns were found in the house, ammunition was discovered in the barn. Scott Ferris, the son, was known to be familiar with firearms from his time in the military. Melody had access to the same weapons. It wasn't unusual. but none of the recovered guns matched the caliber or firing signature of the bullet found in Gary's body. And this is where the case grows cold in a different way. Not from a lack of leads, but from an absence of the one thing that should have been there. How does a murder weapon vanish from a closed property? A home surrounded by family members, no sign of forced entry, no surveillance footage of outsiders coming or going. Only people who lived there. Only people who loved him or claimed to. This forces us to ask hard questions. Did someone hide the gun on the property? Bury it? Toss it into the nearby pond that investigators searched but never fully drained? Was it dismantled and scattered? Hidden in plain sight within the dozens of tools and equipment stored across the farm? Or was it removed entirely? Carried off by someone who had access, time, and motive? And if so, when did that happen? Audience members have pointed out how strange this is. One viewer wrote, "This wasn't some urban alley shooting. It was a family home. The killer didn't just walk in off the street, so where's the gun?" Another commented, "They found everything else. Blood, text messages, tractor stains. But the one thing that ties it all together is missing. That's not just suspicious, that's surgical." And they're right, because this isn't just a logistical gap, it's a psychological one. Someone didn't just kill Gary Ferris, they made sure the how could never be clearly proven. That kind of thinking isn't impulsive, it isn't heat-of-the-moment rage, it's deliberate. And if it was Melody, as the jury ultimately believed, then the question becomes, did she plan it that thoroughly? Did she really remove the weapon from her own home while her children were nearby, with grandchildren asleep upstairs? Or was someone else involved? Someone who knew how to handle a firearm, how to clean a scene, and how to quietly erase the one item that could have sealed the case forever? This makes us wonder, what kind of killer removes the very instrument of death and never looks back? Is that a sign of guilt or of fear? Because the absence of the gun doesn't just point toward a suspect, it whispers of intent. It suggests not just murder, but the expectation of a future investigation. And that perhaps is the most unsettling implication of all. Whoever did this knew from the beginning that someone would come looking. Next, we shift from forensic evidence to emotional evidence. A betrayal so public, so cold, that even longtime viewers of this case called it unforgivable. She didn't just cheat, she brought him to the wedding. Coming up, the act that shattered trust and became the moment many stopped believing her innocence. Some betrayals are whispered in private, others are flaunted in front of everyone who matters. Top 4. The wedding affair, when Melody Ferris invited her lover to dance in front of her husband. The moment Gary Ferris's family started to question his wife's loyalty wasn't in a courtroom, it wasn't during the investigation. It happened long before, it happened at a wedding. Their daughter Emily was getting married in 2016, a milestone, a celebration. And yet, what should have been a joyful day, filled with photos and toasts and tears, became something else entirely. Because that night, Melody didn't just attend as a mother of the bride, she brought someone else. She brought her lover, Rusty Barton. Melody and Rusty had been in a long-term, largely undisclosed affair for years. According to family accounts, it was the worst-kept secret in the Ferris circle. And that night, on the very same evening her husband was present, watching his daughter walk down the aisle, Melody danced with Rusty, drank with him, laughed with him, in front of her children, in front of her husband. This wasn't a lapse in judgment, it was a declaration. And for many who've followed this case, it was the moment the story changed. It told them something about Melody Ferris, not just about her marriage, but about her mindset. Because this wasn't just adultery. This was emotional exhibitionism, a power move, a bold public display of something that should have been kept in the shadows, especially on her daughter's most important day. And what's most chilling is that she never seemed to see a problem with it. When asked about it later, Melody shrugged off the significance. In hindsight, maybe it wasn't the best idea, she said. But there was no remorse, no recognition of the pain it caused her family, no understanding of what it revealed. And that, perhaps, is the mystery buried inside this moment. Was this a misstep by a woman unraveling, a symptom of emotional instability, or was it something darker, a glimpse into the emotional detachment that would later define the prosecution's theory of premeditated murder? Because from that day forward, family relationships began to fracture. Gary, reportedly devastated by the betrayal, withdrew. Tension with the children escalated. Melody grew more defensive, and the Ferris household, already teetering on dysfunction, slid further toward collapse. Investigators would later point to this wedding as a key turning point in the emotional timeline. The affair had become undeniable, and Gary, who controlled the family's wealth and assets, began to cut back. He confronted Melody about her spending, thousands of dollars unaccounted for, withdrawals tied to her trips with Rusty. Texts show his frustration mounting. He was, according to prosecutors, preparing to change the financial arrangement, preparing to end the free ride, and perhaps preparing to end the marriage. But what does it say about someone when they bring their extramarital partner to a family wedding? What kind of psychological space must they occupy to think that was acceptable? Audience reactions to this detail have been strong. Some called it the most disrespectful thing I've ever heard. Others said it flipped the entire case for me. I knew she had it in her after that. But there are deeper questions to explore. Was Melody craving attention, asserting dominance? Or was this an act of emotional sabotage, meant to humiliate her husband in public? And, perhaps more hauntingly, was this the first signal of a longer plan? One in which Gary's removal wasn't spontaneous, but inevitable? This makes us wonder. How does someone so openly betray the person they once pledged their life to, while still living under the same roof? What else were they capable of hiding? Because the image of that night, Melody dancing with her lover, the glow of string lights overhead, and Gary somewhere in the background watching, is one that doesn't fade. It's the kind of image that fractures trust, reframes character, and redefines motive. And maybe that was the point. Next, we explore the final and most psychologically disturbing moment of all: a courtroom, a sentencing, and a mother turning to face the jury, not with remorse, but with an accusation, aimed directly at her own son. Top 5. The verdict built on absence, not evidence. After nearly 6 years of investigation, months of pretrial motions, and a tense courtroom showdown, the jury in the murder trial of Melody Ferris returned with their decision. Guilty on all counts: malice murder, felony murder, concealing a death, making false statements. But what's perhaps most haunting about the verdict isn't what the jury saw, it's what they didn't. There was no eyewitness, there was no confession, and perhaps most importantly, there was no murder weapon. So how exactly did 12 jurors come to a unanimous decision? One that would send a 64-year-old woman to prison for life. According to post-trial interviews and courtroom reporting, it wasn't a single piece of evidence that convinced them. It was the sum of absence. The puzzle formed by what wasn't there. The logic, in its simplest form, was this: if she didn't do it, then who did? It's a question that feels pointed, powerful, almost airtight. And yet, it's a question that inverts one of the most sacred principles of our justice system. The burden of proof lies with the prosecution, not the defendant. When jurors begin their deliberation from a place of elimination, crossing off people until only one remains, it's easy to confuse process of elimination with proof beyond a reasonable doubt. In this case, the state argued Melody was the only person on the property when Gary disappeared. They pointed to her access to the farm equipment, her knowledge of Gary's location, the cell phone GPS data showing movement of Gary's phone while only she was home, and yes, her affair, her motive, her financial dependency. But each of these pieces on their own required interpretation. None were direct, and yet, taken together, they became damning. Still, no one could explain how Melody moved a 300-pound man across the property. No one could explain how the murder weapon disappeared, and the final scene, the burn pile, offered more mystery than clarity. This makes us pause. Was this conviction a result of evidence or inevitability? Was the jury asking, did the prosecution prove their case? Or were they asking, If she didn't do it, then who else could have? It's a subtle shift, but one with enormous consequences. Because if not her, then who, may feel like a compelling question. But it's not a legal standard. And in a system built on the presumption of innocence, it becomes a dangerous replacement for reasonable doubt. Many viewers and commentators struggled with this exact tension. One audience member put it bluntly, "I think she did it, but I'm not sure that means they proved it." Another wrote, "This case scares me because it shows how little evidence you really need if people don't like you." Others defended the verdict, pointing to circumstantial cases that have resulted in just outcomes before. But what we can't ignore is the weight that absence of an alternative carried in that jury room. It wasn't a bloody glove. It wasn't a clear confession. It was a vacuum. One person left standing when all others had been cleared. And it raises the ultimate discomfort for any true crime follower. Is that enough? Is it justice? Or is it something else? This makes us wonder how many convictions are built not on what we can prove, but what we can't explain away. How many verdicts are whispered, not shouted, because we're more afraid of being wrong than we are of admitting we don't know. And what does it say when the system settles not for certainty, but for conclusion? Because in this case, the jury didn't answer how Gary died. They didn't have to. They only had to answer, who else could it have been? And once they decided that list had only one name, the verdict was written. What do you think about these 5 mysterious elements? Which one lingers in your mind the most? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below before we dive into the collective analysis and explore the major theories behind these mysteries. And if you believe this video deserves to be seen, leave a like and hit subscribe to Cold Radio. That's how you help bring these cold cases one step closer to the light of truth. We've now traced the strange contours of this case, point by point, moment by moment. A whispered confession before a body was even found. A woman, half her husband's weight, allegedly moving him across a farm with no physical trace. A murder weapon that vanished without a shadow. A public act of betrayal that cracked the image of a grieving wife, and a conviction that didn't rest on proof, but on the absence of anyone else to blame. Each one is disturbing on its own, but together, they form something far more unsettling. A puzzle that resists clarity, a narrative that doesn't snap into place, no matter how hard the prosecution or the defense tried to force the pieces to fit. So let's step back and look again, not just at the pieces, but how they align, or don't. If Melody Ferris was the killer, as the court concluded, then we are meant to believe that she shot her husband without anyone hearing the shots, cleaned the scene without leaving clear evidence of cleanup, moved a 300-pound man, either alone or with machinery, yet left no blood trail, hid or destroyed the murder weapon, so thoroughly it's never been found, and burned the body in broad daylight the next morning without anyone noticing until it was too late. All of this while maintaining a calm enough demeanor to coordinate with family members, direct a search party, and conceal the truth for days. It's not impossible, but it demands a specific kind of criminal, calculating, capable, and emotionally detached. Does that align with what we know about Melody? Some say yes, citing her public affair, her cool demeanor during trial, her dramatic accusations. Others point to her chaotic emotional history, outbursts, and the deep fracture lines in the family and argue it suggests impulsivity, not strategy. Now consider an alternate possibility. One the defense floated and Melody herself declared at her sentencing, that her son, Scott Ferris, committed the murder, that he had motive, financial dependence, a strained relationship with his father, and the physical ability to carry out the crime. And yet, Scott had an alibi. Phone records place him miles from the property at the critical time. He cooperated with investigators, and crucially, he was the one who found Gary's body and called it in. So if he was involved, it would have required a coordinated effort, a plan made in advance, a joint cover-up. But no solid evidence has ever emerged tying him to the crime beyond speculation. Then there's the third theory, the one that never quite crystallized in court but lingers in the minds of many in the audience, that this was a crime of opportunity, that someone else, a farm worker, a neighbor, a third party no one's named, acted while Gary was vulnerable. That the Ferris family, locked in its own tangled drama, never saw it coming. But that theory collapses against two hard facts: the lack of evidence for an outsider and the timeline. According to the GPS data, Gary's phone was moved after his likely time of death, and only one person was home: Melody. And yet, even with that, we're left with questions. Where is the murder weapon? Why was no blood trail found outside? If this was premeditated, why risk burning the body in the open instead of disposing of it in secret? And perhaps most hauntingly, if she didn't do it, why did she seem to know exactly where he was, before anyone else did? It's the weight of these unanswered questions that leaves this case feeling, not cold, but unfinished. The verdict was delivered, the sentence imposed, but the mystery still open. Because what this case reveals isn't just the limits of evidence, it's the tension between doubt and certainty, between the emotional pull of a narrative and the cold requirements of proof. So, we ask you, our cold radio audience, what do you think? Was this a perfect storm of circumstantial clues that led to the right person, or a slow, procedural drift toward the easiest answer? Was Melody Ferris a wronged woman, a manipulator, a mother covering for someone she feared, or simply the only person left standing in a house of ghosts? We want to hear your theory. If there's something the prosecution missed, if there's a connection that hasn't been made, or if you believe the truth still hasn't been told, drop your thoughts in the comments. Because at Cold Radio, we believe stories like this don't belong to the courts alone. They belong to all of us who ask the hard questions, who see the cracks, who refuse to let the fire burn away the truth. Some cases leave behind more than headlines and transcripts. They leave echoes, wounds that don't close, questions that whisper through the years, long after the jury rises and the cell door clicks shut. The murder of Gary Ferris shattered more than a family. It ruptured an entire ecosystem of trust, inheritance, and history. It didn't just take a life, it fractured the very meaning of what a family is supposed to be. 3 of his children took the stand against their mother. 1 stood by her. And now, the Ferris family exists not as a home, but as a series of legal statements, text messages, and scars that no verdict can undo. Gary Ferris wasn't a symbol. He was a man, a father, a grandfather known lovingly as Big Daddy by the children who rode with him across that 10-acre farm. A brilliant commercial real estate attorney, he spent decades building a life that, while not perfect, was his version of home. Horses in the fields, family dinners, fences repaired by hand. He helped his children financially long after they were grown. He was described as meticulous, sometimes difficult, but always present. And that presence, solid, familiar, is what was truly lost in the fire. Not just a body burned in secret, but a person, a protector, a father. What remains now is a silence too heavy to name, not just for his children, but for a community that watched one of its own become the center of a real-life tragedy that, at times, felt too dark even for fiction. The trial ended. A verdict was reached. But does justice, in its technical form, ever truly satisfy the ache of questions left unanswered? We still don't know how Melody, a woman of slight frame, could have moved her husband's body alone. We still don't know where the murder weapon is, or how someone so close could remove every trace of it. We still don't know whether her final, explosive courtroom accusation against her son was a desperate lie, or a long-withheld truth no one wanted to believe, and perhaps most hauntingly, we still don't know why. What breaks inside a person to turn a marriage into murder? What grief, or anger, or calculation pushes someone from resentment to fire? Maybe those answers are buried with the gun. Maybe they were burned with Gary himself. Or maybe they're still out there, hidden in the spaces between family loyalty and betrayal, between what was said and what was meant. But in telling this story, we're not just seeking guilt or innocence. We're searching for something deeper. The why behind the what. The psychology. The pressure points. The quiet storms no one sees until it's too late. Because that's what stories like this offer, not resolution, but reflection. A chance to see how easily love can turn into control. how truth can dissolve under heat, and how even the people we trust the most can become strangers in the dark. You watched this case not just for facts, but for understanding, and maybe you leave it not with certainty, but with a sharpened sense of how fragile truth can be, how justice, even when served, doesn't always bring peace. If this video offered you a new perspective or made you pause and reflect, please hit like to help Cold Radio share this story with more people. What are your thoughts on this case? What part left you questioning the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because every perspective, every theory, could be a vital piece of the truth we're all trying to uncover. And don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss any of the cases we'll be opening next. Thank you for joining us, listening, and lending your voice to Cold Radio's pursuit of the truth.